Hello, hello. Let's talk Dragon Age. We're about 3 weeks away from the launch of Veilguard, and I figured now is probably a good time for me to get some recording practice in before I record myself playing the game. This is my very first YouTube venture, and I'm sure I will make tons of mistakes, so thanks for bearing with me. While the Dragon Age games are hands down my favorite computer RPG series, I'm also an avid tabletop gamer. I primarily run Call of Cthulhu, but my Dungeons & Dragons group has been playing together for years. We actually just passed our 200th session back in January, which was super exciting. And as I think more about how I plan to approach playing Rook here in a couple of weeks, I'm finding myself going back to a lot of the same things I do to prepare a new character for a tabletop game. Stats, or the mechanical makeup of a character, are important to ensuring they actually survive a game, but I tend to approach character creation from a more narrative perspective. While everybody thinks about character creation in their own way, and my way definitely won't work for everybody, my appreciation of role-playing games really stems from a love of characters, and making these characters, who aren't real people, seem like real people because of the time and the care we spend on them. If you know longtime Dragon Age fans, or happen to be one yourself, you know we are gluttons for lore and world building. I am notorious for pestering my game masters for world information before I even begin making a character for a game, because I want to feel like my characters belong in the worlds they inhabit before I start rolling dice. While I might have a class or build idea in the back of my brain when I'm making a character, I like to conceptualize the character as a person first, and then build the mechanics around that based on what would make sense for that person. I'll be doing the same thing when I create my Rook, and while I have been reading a lot about the new class build system and the special abilities on the mechanical side of things, it looks to me like a tremendously improved version of the system they tried to implement with Mass Effect Andromeda, so I'm looking forward to digging into that. But I really want to use Rook's faction background as the base I build on, and from the information we have, Rook's life before Veilguard looks very different depending on what faction you choose. So I'm going to go through each one of those and tie in pieces of world information I think might be relevant. I definitely want to consider how race and class are affected by or impact those backgrounds. I want to use all this information to build a more holistic image of Rook in my mind before I begin role-playing as them. What I imagine they've experienced in life before Veilguard is going to heavily impact the choices I make as Rook. And really, the reason I'm doing this is because having that deeper connection with the character creates a much more rewarding experience with the game, at least for me. Just a quick side note regarding spoilers, I absolutely cannot guarantee this will be spoiler-free because I'm pulling from all of the Dragon Age media I've consumed, and the knowledge of which is crammed into my brain from the books, the comics, the short stories, obviously the games, as well as a lot of the information that's been released surrounding Veilguard so far. So you may want to give the rest of this video a pass if you're looking to avoid any and all information surrounding Veilguard before the game launches. I don't know what would have possessed you to click on this video, though if that were the case, perhaps a spirit of curiosity? I don't know. So yeah, this is your warning sign post. If you don't want any spoilers for any of the peripheral media, especially like Tevinter Nights or the Dragon Age Day short stories or the comics, turn back now. So, who is Rook? BioWare has provided us with information about the 6 factions we can choose from when we're building our character, so we're going to take a closer look at what each of those backgrounds might mean for Rook as a person, and how we might use that information to help inform a deeper role-playing experience with the Veilguard. I'm kind of thinking I might do this as a series of shorter videos instead of one giant long one. This one's obviously longer because I've spent a lot of time nattering, but let's jump in and we'll see what we come up with. Our first faction we're going to look at is the Shadow Dragons. They're kind of an undercover resistance group based in Minrathous, but working throughout Tevinter to help and free slaves and fight against the corruption within the Imperium. We don't have a ton of information about the Shadow Dragons as an organization, but they do make a brief appearance at the end of the Dark Horse comic The Missing. Varric and Harding are in Minrathous trying to track down Solus and contact Nev Gallus for help. The secretive nature of this organization and the work they do means these people have to maintain covers as upstanding citizens of the Tevinter Imperium, but Nev does mention that the Shadow Dragons have been receiving some unwanted and negative attention from the Venatori recently. She's also gone up against them in Tevinter Knights. In the streets of Minrathous, Nev actually allies herself with some of the Tevinter Templars to prevent the Venatori from awakening a demon under the city. And yeah, that's awakening, not summoning, so this thing is still there under Minrathous as of the Veilguard. I honestly have no idea what the implications of this could be for Veilguard, but it's honestly terrifying to think there's just some demon taking a nap underneath Minrathous. Yeah. So one of the Dragon Age Day short stories, Minrathous Shadows, brings in a Templar named Tarquin. I may be completely butchering his name, and if I am, I'm sorry. There's a Tarquin mentioned in a Codex entry in the Descent DLC that describes him recovering from a very awful experience with Darkspawn. If it's the same Tarquin, I feel really bad for this guy. He has seen some shit. But Tarquin's working with a mysterious figure called the Viper. I wonder how the Viper could be connected to the Shadow Dragons, whether they might even be a leader within this faction. It's not stated, but here Tarquin and the Viper are really putting the pressure on a Magister related to her connection with the Venatori. So, interesting. Sleeping demons aside, Minrathous is enormous and ancient, and the city itself reflects the clear divisions in the social structure of Tevinter. Nev takes Varric and Harding to a slightly rougher part of Minrathous, where the Shadow Dragons have been working to provide food to freed slaves. So if we're playing as a Rook with the Shadow Dragon's faction background, Rook is more familiar with the seedier, rougher side of Minrathous, while having to maintain the appearance of normalcy when interacting with the rest of society. We do know a little bit about what Rook was up to before they joined Varric and Harding, so I'm going to break that down piece by piece. In this case, for a Rook who's working with the Shadow Dragons prior to Veilguard, it says, the foundling Rook was adopted into a military family and joined the Shadow Dragons to fight from the shadows for change in Minrathous. So Rook's adoptive family would be members of the Soparati class, which is all common civilians of Tevinter who are not mages. It's kind of the bottom rung on the social hierarchy ladder within Tevinter. These would be all normal civilians who aren't mages, and the Soparati class is comprised mainly of humans. Although since Rook's adopted, Rook could be of any race. Humans are the most highly regarded race in Tevinter. Dwarves are probably treated alright, especially because Tevinter still has trade relations with Kalsharak. Elves are primarily slaves within the Imperium, and Tevinter's been at war with the Kunari for a long time, so playing as a Kunari here might be kind of interesting. Even if Rook is a mage, they would not add to their family's social standing because they're not a natural-born child. Families within the Soparati class can climb higher into the Latent class if they have a natural-born child who's a mage, but because Rook's adopted, that wouldn't necessarily do anything for their family socially. I can kind of start to see a few places where we might fit class in here. A mage Rook would have had more freedom in Tevinter than anywhere else in Thedas, whereas a warrior Rook might have tried to follow in their adoptive family's footsteps with martial training. And Minrathous would have afforded a lot of opportunities for a rogue Rook to learn how to pick pockets and pick locks and sneak around in back alleyways. All that good rogue stuff. And just for a little etymological fun, the last name Rook is automatically assigned if they start out as a member of the Shadow Dragons faction is Mercar. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Tevinter is based heavily on ancient Rome, including the names, which are Latin-based, and Mercar comes from the Latin word mercare for merchant, which falls right in line with Rook's family belonging to the Soparati class, which would include merchants. Rook is actually an alias this character uses, and we can assign them whatever true name we want in Character Creator, so I guess it's time for me to dust off my high school Latin textbooks? Or just use a Latin name generator like a normal nerd. But if we're playing Rook as a Shadow Dragon and want that deeper, more immersive roleplay with them, picking a Latin name would definitely fit. This is just me going off on a weird historical tangent here, but in ancient Rome, the personal name or the first name was usually important to the family in some way. You would have names passed down from older relatives or ancestors within the same family. It was also pretty common for children to be named after important leaders or historic figures of the time. So it would be perfectly reasonable for your rook to take their personal name from a figure from Tevinter history. This kind of tradition was already illustrated for us in Inquisition with Calpurnia, who chose that name for herself after the mother of the first Archon of Tevinter. So you should absolutely feel free to steal a name from Tevinter history and apply it to your rook. There is a precedent. Mages are treated with higher respect in Tevinter, so a mage rook might be treated a little bit better even though they're of a lower social class. But the next bit tells us Rook definitely has a rebellious streak. Apparently, while guarding a visiting dignitary who was investigating a slavery ring in the nearby city of Nessus, Rook concluded that the mission would fail without throwing caution to the wind. Nessus is definitely a typo. It's supposed to be Nessum, which, fun fact, is where Absolution is set. Alone, Rook sneaked the dignitary deep into Venatori-controlled zones and brought him back along with the rescued slaves. A couple things stand out to me about this section. Rook is actively working against the Venatori, and also this dignitary, while not named, is referred to as he. I wonder if that could be our dear beloved Dorian Pavis. I can hope, right? Working with the Shadow Dragons, Rook would definitely at least know who Dorian is. At this point in the timeline, Dorian has spent the past decade working to fight for change in his own way within his own social class. He's taken over his father's role within the Magisterium and has been working closely with Maevaris Talani, who will be in Veilguard. I'm so excited to see her. She's such a cool character. So Rook might at least know about the Lucerni, which is the group Dorian and Maevaris have been working to put together to fight corruption from higher up within Tevinter. I also have to wonder if Fenris has any connections with the Shadow Dragons. Maybe we'll get a codex entry or something? Fingers crossed. Anyway, the last part of this says, these actions brought Rook to the Venatori's attention, and the Shadow Dragons decided to keep Rook out of sight. So Rook did something pretty brash. It was successful. They did manage to free the slaves, but the Venatori now know who Rook is and that Rook is trouble for them. So a couple things I'm pulling from this little bit of background information we have about Rook as the breaker of bonds within the the Shadow Dragons faction. They value freedom. It's what they're fighting for. They're a person of action. They're driven to complete a task, even if that means they go about it a little recklessly. They're going to get the job done no matter what. They're a self-reliant person, maybe even a little recalcitrant, not necessarily against the rulers of Tevinter, but against people telling them what to do or how to do it. I can see them chafing at the idea of having to lie low while the Venatori threat blows over. So having people like Harding and Varric show up, needing assistance from somebody who knows the city, especially the underside, and the movements of secret organizations within it, would give them a chance to do something. Now, I know Rook has been set up as kind of a mirror for Solus, especially some qualities Solus might not necessarily like within himself, and I am so excited to see how that plays out. I am obviously just spinning here and seeing what I can pull out of the little tidbits we've been given so far, but I can definitely see that rebellious streak and Rook butting heads with Solus. That's gonna get real interesting. Now, something that really jumped out at me while I was reading through all the background blurbs for Rooks of various factions is that Rook is written to be an action-oriented protagonist. And that's not necessarily, I don't want to say a rare thing for a video game protagonist, but more often than not, player-controlled characters have to be reactive to events in games. And it looks like we're being set up from the get-go as someone who is capable of making decisions on the fly, is capable of stepping into that leadership role, and to me, that's really cool. I think it's promising. So hopefully this has been helpful to you, especially if you're an immersive role player like I am. I'm going through and doing this kind of analysis for all of the backgrounds, which I hope to share shortly. I also have many other thoughts, which I should be sharing over the next couple of weeks as we get ready for Veilguard. I would love to hear your thoughts in the meantime, so feel free to drop me a comment, question, concern, or critique down below, and I'll try to figure out the YouTube video thing in the meantime. I realized in this video I have mentioned a lot of people and places as well as events that have taken place in Thedas up to the Veilguard. I will not be covering those topics in great detail. Some other content creators on here have done a phenomenal job of going into specific topics and discussing those at length. If I tried to do any of that, we would be here for hours. When some of the first gameplay footage for Veilguard came out, I watched it with friends on Discord, and I think it was about a half-hour video segment, and we spent about 4 hours picking apart every little detail because we kept having to pause and go, wait, what's that on that statue right there? How does that relate to this other thing? That is my jam. I love connecting with other Dragon Age fans, especially those who are into the deep lore and wild theories like I am, so if you want to connect, I am here for that. Drop me a note below and let's keep talking Dragon Age. Stay sane, and I will see you later. Cheers!